Today is October 3rd, 2013, and I'm in Tahlequah, Oklahoma at Murv Jacob studio in downtown Tahlequah. Murv, you're not only a fine artist, but you've illustrated numerous books, many written by your wife, Deborah Duvall, and they've won several awards in the publishing business. Your poetic style often depicts various animal personalities in lush woodland environments, many inspired by Cherokee tales, traditional tales. You're also one of those rare artists who has been able to run their own gallery for almost 30 years. Now you've added a second one in Tulsa. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in a little suburb of Cincinnati called Glendale, Ohio. When I was born there, I was born in a little shotgun house. They've bulldozed all that stuff out of there. It's big old fancy houses now. I was raised, however, east of Topeka, between Topeka and Lawrence, Kansas, and spent my childhood in this kind of rural environment. My dad had a tree nursery, taught me the Latin name to every tree, while the other kids were coming home after school to watch TV. I was coming home to work and dig trees and move them around and learn how to drive trucks and tractor. I was an agriculturalist as a child. And I actually grew up in a neighborhood full of Menninger's psychiatrists. And these were like the top psychiatrists on this little planet. And Aldous Huxley used to come visit Bernard Hall every year. It was an interesting neighborhood, to say the least. And we were kind of in charge of doing their landscaping and stuff, but they treated us, they were egalitarians. They were so far on the upper crust that they treated us as equals, which is unusual on this planet. But they introduced, in fact, I remember Dr. Hall's secretary typed me up a bibliography back way before Google with all of Aldous Huxley's books on it, and which I later read, all of his books, which I have first editions of in the back of the studio at this point, because Aldous Huxley was as important as John F. Kennedy wasn't. Anyway, that's where I grew up.
Okay,
then I later lived in San Francisco for 2 or 3 years. I moved out there about the time that the Haight-Ashbury was becoming a center for poets and artists and musicians. I lived in Texas for a couple of years, where my daughter Jana was born, and I lived on the coast for a while. Then I moved way up in the desert, where I met a lot of Mexican people. Then I lived up in New York State for a couple of years, up in Westchester County above the city, and it was a writers and artists and actors community. And for the last 25 years I've lived here in Tahlequah, Oklahoma with Debbie Duvall, I'm sitting here looking at the microphone talking to it, which is crazy. I'm going to try to look at the camera. But don't take that out, because I think that's an important part of human nature. That when we're talking, we want to talk to a microphone.
You had brothers and sisters, I guess.
Oh yeah, but I'd rather, I think, talk about my dad. My dad was he was Kentucky Cherokee and Alabama Creek. His mother was put into an Indian boarding school up in Kentucky as a child, where she escaped. And he only went to the 5th grade because his father was arrested for running some moonshine up into Ohio from Kentucky, and the jail burned up while he was in there on a 30-day sentence or something. And so my dad was the oldest of 5 children, and had to go to work to support the family. And he went to work for a guy that had a tree nursery, and that's why later on he had a tree nursery and I got to work for him, and it was great. My father was just about the most environmental, the softest spoken, probably killed as many people in World War II as anybody that was fighting in that conflict. But didn't start out that way, he just got pushed into a corner and started fighting back. I had a brother who died when he was about 2 years old, so my young childhood, a lot of it I didn't get to spend with my mom because she was at the hospital with my little brother Johnny. And I remember this just in bits and pieces because I was like 3.5 to 5 years old or something. And I remember these big, friendly, outrageous country girls that took care of me because my mom was off at the hospital. And kind of like bad nannies, you know. It was a great part of my childhood. I still remember it well, but I can't talk about it.
What is your first memory of seeing native art?
Dreams. And, well, my grandmother had family reunions every year, and she had them at the old mounds up in Ohio, and we would go to Fort Ancient, we would go to Twin Mounds, we would go to the Serpent Mound. Every couple of years we'd have a family reunion up there at a different one of the mounds. And I remember that was the art I remember, were those mounds, you know. And then of course they would have little adjunct museums that had pieces that the people carved and stuff like that. And then of course I got really enthralled by this crazy Wichita artist called Black Bear Boson, who was on, I think, the cover of National Geographic magazine with one of his paintings of a Kansas prairie fire that he did. And later got to know the guy real well. He was this barrel-chested, friendly guy who would give you a bear hug and make you feel like you'd known him all his life. When he, especially after I got to know him, we just got to be great friends. And Boson.
How old were you when you met him?
Oh, I don't know. I was like in my late 20s, early 30s. But I was living in Lawrence for a long time, and Haskell was right there, and Dick West was right there, and I had a little art gallery of my own. I was precocious. I had an art gallery and showed kind of Kansas modern art, which was kind of folky, Thomas Hart Benton stuff to me. And along with New York modern art, I was hooked up with some lady that had a gallery in Kansas City, and she was allowing me to show prints by Rauschenberg and all the New York artists, and so I would like put these things kind of juxtaposed, these Kansas paintings juxtaposed with these latest New York creations that were basically like anti-art to me, you know.
But
I've always considered the landscape the basis of art, kind of like Van Gogh did.
Right.
You know, I've always was kind of much more impressed by Cezanne than I was by Jackson Pollock. But you know, I saw what Pollock was doing, and I thought it was like spectacular 20th century space cave painting. You know, just going wild. You know, and that's all good.
So you did know your grandma, though, pretty well spent some
My
time
great
with her.
grandmother taught me to paint from the time I was 8 years old with oils.
No, this
She
is
was-
on your dad's side?
She was on my mother's side.
Okay.
She was a Brooks. She was a Hemp Street. She was an artist all her life back when women artists didn't get any recognition at all, and was doing some damn good paintings. As I look back on them, I was pretty impressed. But until Frida Kahlo, there weren't any women artists of any magnitude because the male-dominated European art establishment wouldn't allow such a thing.
So your great-grandma actually sort of
She
coached
started
you?
teaching me to
How-
paint with oils when I
How
was
old were
8
you
years
when
old.
you were 8?
And it was a mess, I'm sure, for her. But I remember her rooms were always full of fresh cut flowers. She lived at my grandfather's house and had a kind of a suite of rooms on the second floor. I suppose she probably was the one that bought the house for it. And she lived up there, and the place was always smelled of oil paints and linseed oil and copal oil and fresh cut flowers. And she liked painting big wads of flowers the same way Vincent did, you know. And
Now, is this your earliest memory of doing art, is painting with your great-grandma?
oh no, I remember when I was a little tiny kid trying to scrounge pieces of paper from people so I could do drawings and stuff. People were always giving my parents paper, so I would have paper to do these piles of drawings that I used to do even when I think I was drawing as soon as I learned to pick up a pencil, you know.
Did you have any valuable art experiences in elementary school or secondary school?
Oh yeah, I liked high school art teacher I had. She really encouraged me. You know, most of the kids were in the art class to have an easy class, and they were a bunch of idiots, but she saw that I was serious about art even at that age, and she really focused on me and threw me a lot of choice tidbits to get my brain going, and showed us films about Picasso, and showed us films about Pollock, and showed us films about Vincent. You know, it was all good. Usually it was hard to watch the films because other people were throwing things at each other. I was fairly large, so they didn't really throw stuff at me, you know. But
But you took it seriously. Did you
Yeah, art.
Did you sell any work when you were in high school?
I don't know. Probably gave it away to girls I liked. I know I was already, by high school, I already had a couple of girls that were my models. And I did like nude drawings of them. And a few years ago, my mom showed me these drawings that I did in high school, and they weren't too bad. I was going, you know, but I was having to kind of clandestinely bring girls around and draw them nude, because my parents were fairly religious. That was kind of, but they never held it against me that I was an artist or that I liked artists and wild people. You know, they always saw it as quite interesting.
Now, you mentioned you ended up, well, you went to college, I guess, in San
Yeah,
Bernardino.
when I was 17, I abandoned high school, which was a lost cause, and went out there and passed the entrance exam and went to college for about a half a semester and realized college was extended high school. And at that point it began to dawn on me that none of the great artists had actually gone to college, though college was more and more appropriating these guys, like they were taking the stuff that they had done and wearing around like their clothes so they weren't really wearing any clothes at all. And college began to look more to me like ROTC training and how to build nuclear devices, and it was just not something I wanted to be associated with at all. You know, in fact, I guess I sort of dropped out of college completely after I spent 2 years living in San Francisco and up in Marin County and hanging around with everybody from Jimi Hendrix. I probably hung out with Janis Joplin 100 times, but we were both 20-year-old kids. Jerry Garcia was an older guy. He was like 22 or 23, you know, but we still hit it off really well.
Were you playing an instrument? Were you
Not
active
at all.
in the
I
music
was,
scene?
in fact, I did posters in those days, which are still floating around. I was part of that art scene that did those fabulously overblown and overemphasized posters for people like Michael McClure, the poet. McClure was like the youngest of the beat poets. McClure really was like that. He was like from Kansas, but he moved out there, and the Ginsberg and those people loved him and took him under their wing, and he began writing his beast poems and his crazy plays like The Beard. And McClure actually got me to, I did one of the posters for his play The Beard, which was never ever put on without getting busted at the end, when Billy the Kid has oral sex with Jean Harlow. And that hence was The Beard, because neither of them had beards. But I got it. I got what he was talking about. I understood these beatniks. I actually think I saved Ginsberg's life one night from a bunch of gypsy joker motorcycle guys. I've never liked bikers. If you're a biker watching this, I don't like you, you know. you're a Nazi. You were wearing swastikas in those days. I've always been kind of leaning toward always liked Fidel Castro better than John Kennedy. You know, I'm sorry, but he was like a huge millionaire guy, and Castro was creating a place where people could live. You know, if I'm native art, it has to do with something bigger than one tribe. It has to do with the Americas being appropriated, and the Mayans and the Aztecs turned into an agricultural workforce, the hacienda system. You know, I'm a partisan. You know, I don't like the Koch brothers. I don't really. Who I am is unimportant, though, that my artwork that I do, and Julie will tell you that I stopped what I was doing to do this interview because I try to paint every day. I've had some health problems. I'm 68, but I still think it's important for an artist not just to brag about being an artist, but to actually paint every day.
Murv, did you get a chance? And of course, Native activism was kind of getting, happening around the 60s too. Did you see any of that scene at that point, or?
I was about this close to the whole Alcatraz scene, but I'd already moved up to Marin County and then moved back to Kansas when Alcatraz got going. I've always totally admired Native activism, but what I see is a problem with Native American activists thinking that Mexican Indians aren't Native Americans and Bolivian Indians aren't Native Americans, and the people crossing the border somehow aren't Native Americans when all of them are. They're the disjointed agricultural people that came up here to take care of the crops. And I've always had the greatest respect for these people. I lived down on the Texas-Mexican border for a year. And
now, how old were you when you were living down there?
Probably 30.
Mm-hmm.
And I was painting, and I was living across the street from another guy who was a painter, and it was back in the days when Cormac McCarthy showed up in that neighborhood and started writing. He showed up from like Pennsylvania, and the distance and the sky and the people and everything just blew his mind. Cormac McCarthy becomes this totally different person after a couple of years down in that border country. But I was living in No Country for Old Men when he was, in the time he was talking about, I was seeing the agriculturalism become the drug trade,
mm-hmm.
Because it was so much more lucrative, and the government couldn't boss them around, and anyway, yeah.
So you mentioned in Lawrence, then you had your art gallery. It was
called 7 East 7th Gallery.
Right.
That was the address. And it was, the guy gave me a real big break on the rent because he liked what I was doing. He was a visionary. He could see what I was doing. Just like this place here, the lady that owns it's pretty rich. She charges me less rent than most people around here charge for a decrepit, dilapidated, disjointed mobile home. But she likes me, so I have a studio on the main street.
So I'm wondering when you just really decided, you started exploring Native subject matter and got so...
Oh, well, I am. That's who I am. That's where we went to our family reunions. That's where I first skinned up both knees and both elbows, and my face was all falling down a mound,
But you were exploring different subject matter, too. And so when you really set on this path, was it when you were in Kansas or after meeting Boson, or was it happening
you're trying to make it like I went on different paths, and it was all one totally unified path that I've been on ever since I was a kid.
Right.
Ever since I started reading good novelists, I knew it was time for me to make a dent in the crap going on,
Right. So how about your color scheme? Was it what you're using now, or when did it kind of start to change, do you think?
Oh, I don't think my color scheme's changed at all. You can go back and look at the stuff I was doing 30 years ago, and I was very basically using the same colors. I basically like the colors of Cezanne more than any other artist. The colors Cezanne used influenced me as a kid, and they still do. You know, Gauguin was the first Native American artist. He was 1/4 Inca and 1/4 Spanish and half French. So he was ostensibly the first Native American artist of any magnitude. But if they'd known he was an Inca, they probably wouldn't have treated him with such deference.
How did you end up moving to Oklahoma? What made you decide to make your way down here?
Was coming down here to see a kind of Cherokee artist, historian, culturalist named Cecil Dick. And you can look him up on Google. He's there, and he's probably the most important of all the Cherokee artists, though a lot of them think they are. But he was, you know, and he understood what being Cherokee was, and he liked me from the minute we saw each other. He was an ex-prize fighter. He dressed like a Mexican from Southern California. He dressed like a Mexican Indian. He wore chinos and flannel shirts, and he just didn't put on any kind of airs at all. He could fight a guy if he had to, and he could win, you know. And he was an orphan from the time he was 11 years old, so he went through the most horrible of the Indian boarding schools of that period, like Tahlequah and stuff. And we hit it off from the get-go, and he said, I always thought it was going to be some full-blood that was going to come along and get what I did, but it was you, you know. And I said, well, you know, I didn't know who was going to be my real art teacher, but it turns out to be you, you know. Cecil said, yeah, I studied with this guy who was a European kind of master artist, and he showed me about colors and stuff like that, you know. And Cecil had the notoriety of having been to the Santa Fe, Dorothy Dunn's Santa Fe studio, and being part of the art scene at Bacone College in Muskogee. He was like the only person that went to both of them, and he was just getting pretty damn old by the time I met him. I would have loved to hang out with that guy when he was a young guy out in California, but that was back in the days of the Zoot Suiters and stuff. I'm sure he was like born in 1915 or something. You can look it up.
What did you get? What are the most valuable things you learned from Cecil Dick?
To see what was Cherokee and what was sort of pseudo-Cherokee and what wasn't Cherokee at all. That's, you know, when they created AIM, there wasn't supposed to be a national AIM because every Indian culture is different. Merlin's culture is different from Robbie McMurtry's culture is different from. Everybody comes like from a different culture. There aren't that many artists, and they come together and they act as a unified body. But the people that created AIM wanted to have local AIM organizations, but they knew if they had national organizations, outsider government informants would come in and take up, which is what happened. Go look at it. I know those people. I know the ones that were real. And I know the ones that were government informants, and I'm not going to go into it, you know, but they did that. And they're still doing that, you know. Anytime anybody gets political, these people are going to go throw something on and put out the fire, you know. They're really afraid of the Indians because they took their land. They usurped all these resources. No amount of treaties is going to make what they did right. They took it and then said, here, sign this. You know, any court of law would say, well, that's not right. But the lawyers were born and raised descendants of the people that took the land here, so they don't even get it.
When did you first start entering competitive shows here in Tahlequah?
I didn't really. Our first show I entered down here was at the Five Tribes Museum. You know, I don't have a tribal membership card. And some people take that very seriously and others don't give a damn. And Five Tribes Museum has never cared one way or the other if I had a membership card, even when they were under fire from David Cornsilk and his deranged cohorts. But I entered a show at the Five Tribes Museum and won second place in painting and went, this is fun. And then...
Was it your first competitive show, sort of?
Pretty much, because I was just painting and selling paintings, and I didn't care about competitive shows. And I never saw... I mean, the whole thing seems rather academic to me. But I like the museum, and I like the people at the museum, and at some point they made me a master artist over there, and I think it was the tyrant Chad Smith that actually pushed for my nomination, which is kind of like having Napoleon make you governor of somewhere, Utah, you know. But yeah, it's a great little museum, but then of course it's very exclusivist, and you're saying, well, these are the civilized tribes, which meant what? They had slaves? I think so. I think that's why they considered them civilized, because they enlisted the help of black slaves, not the help, but the forced labor of black slaves. Now, not all Cherokees did that. Not all Creeks did that. You know, the McIntosh Creek certainly did that. John Ross, who they just built a new museum to out here, certainly had 150 slaves at any given time. You know, the Katuas now formed up as an anti-slavery. They were the full-blood society, and their main thing was their opposition to slavery, and they did not see it as an option. And they fought against the Confederacy in the Civil War to great advantage of the North. You know, they fought well. And Stan Wadey, though he had a few slaves and was a lawyer and was able to write titles for slaves and make up titles for slaves, you know, and he didn't go after those people because he determined before the Civil War that he wasn't going to fight other Indians, that he would fight the Europeans, but he would not fight another Indian, depending, no matter what their belief system was, he was not going to raise his hand against another Indian. You know, Stan Wadey was above all else Indian, and one of my heroes, even though he dabbled in slavery, he always seemed to keep his head about him, you know, and not get pulled down into it like a lot of people did, a lot of people around here. You know, and then after the Civil War, they had the Dawes enrollment, and they lined the people up at the Dawes headquarters, and they had guys sitting there looking at the Indians, and if they looked black, if they had the nappy hair, they had the stripes in their fingernails, they would mark them as F for freedmen and mark out their blood quantum and take it away from them. So a lot of like 3/4 blood Indians that had a little trace of black blood were marked clear off the tribe and put in the freedmen rolls, and they still aren't back on them because of the extant racism of the 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, went way on up to World War II. You know, the racism against black people. It still exists in the South. You know, they still need the Voters' Rights Act, even though they've stricken a bunch of... Anyway, yeah. I could talk about that all day, but I guess it's not important, really, about what we're talking about. But I think it is. I'd like to see who the artists would be if they hadn't done that, you know. Then I got kicked out of the Cherokee Nation art shows about 10 years ago for not having a card when they rebooted everything, and I was rebooted out myself, which is fine. I more and more see the Cherokee Nation as a tiny tornado in a teapot, a molehill amongst bloody Sierra mountains, you know, and the people running it are a bunch of white lawyers from Tulsa that wanted to have their own tribe and didn't have enough blood quantum to be Katuas, you know. So I'm not sad to be. Cecil Dick never had anything to do with what those people were doing. And he was a Katua from the time they created the band back in the 1940s. And he always wrote Cecil Dick Katua, you know, and he and I somehow unwittingly made friends with some of these chiefs and stuff. I actually regret it to this day. I really, it's kind of like, forgive me, I know not what I do, you know, what the hell was I thinking? But, you know, it still exists, but it's a joke. And it becomes more of a joke every day. There are people now in the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma that are 1/4,000th Indian. These are not Indians. I'm sorry to be the one to point it out, you know, and it's not because I'm disgruntled, it's because I'm amused and amazed. You know, how can they call themselves Indians? They've got people on the tribal council that are 1/256th. They keep saying blood quantum's not important, we're citizens. What crap, of course it is. These laws and provisions and treaties were made for Indian people to help them adjust and be able to deal with what's going on in their world. Or were they just put in place to pin their ears back? It's always been a debatable subject.
What were some galleries that were important to you as you started entering shows and winning awards? Or was gallery representation very important?
No, it never was. I always wanted to represent myself. I always saw galleries kind of the way Merlin does, which is they take half the money for representing you. Oh, thank you very much. You know, that's kind of like, you know, it's like I'm not paying enough money to survive on this planet as it is without galleries. And that's why I don't have a bunch of other people at this gallery. If I lose somebody's painting, they're going to be genuinely pissed off at me. You know, they're going to not like where I hung it. You know, I just want to have my artwork and hang it where I want to, and, you know, and the gallery up in Tulsa's not doing any good. Tulsa used to be just dramatically rich 30, 40 years ago, but now she's kind of like an old lady that used to be rich pushing a shopping cart around, you know, like a bag lady. And there are some rich people, but they don't really care about the arts. They're vested. They don't, you know, they used to care about art, but they're not very really interested in it. They're starting to treat Woody Guthrie like a native son. They hated that guy 20 years ago. They tore his house down in Okemah. Now they have a festival, you know. It's all crap, you know. I like Tulsa, but as you know from living there, it's got an unbelievable murder rate. People just they killed the guy because he charged them too much for getting them a car key the other night. You know, I mean, this guy, and then of course he was in on it too. He had a gun. It turned into a Wild West gunfight. You know, he was too slow though. These gangsters outshot him. Craziness. I just seem to be over here in the woods. The methamphetamines have taken their toll over here in the woods.
How did you meet your wife, Debbie?
I was delivering some paintings to a show at the Cherokee Heritage Center, and I took the paintings down they said, take those down in the basement. So I took the paintings down in the basement, and there was Debbie Duvall, and I fell in love with her right that minute. And we had a brief whirlwind courtship, and we've been together for 25 years. You know.
That's great.
Yeah, she's just, I don't know, she's probably got an IQ of 200. I probably got an IQ of 150. But well, she can put up with me because she's got an IQ of 200 and she's used to that shit, you know. She's used to people being dumber than her.
We're going to talk about your collaboration here in a minute, but I was wondering, the business part of art is sometimes the hardest to handle. How did you approach it when you really were selling and you were serious about selling?
Well, when it comes to business, I'm going to have to quote Rhett Butler from Gone with the Wind. You know.
How about when you got your first illustration job?
I was real excited. I don't get as excited now. I'll tell you one thing that the artists need to understand, though: the bigger the publisher, the easier it is to work with the people. The littler the publisher, the more they're so worried about this thing rising or falling, and you know they're not going to throw the baby out with the bathtub like a big publisher. You know, big publishers don't really care. They're fun to work with. You can get away with anything. They were always sending. I was sending them stuff to approve, and then they'd send it back, and then they'd tell me they wanted something else, but I'd put something else in there, and then we'd argue about it, but not very much. And I hid cryptic slogans, and I mean, I've always been an illustrator, but 100 years from now, people are going to look at my books and find all these hidden figures and hidden slogans and hidden sayings, and you know, the Disney people caught up with me, and the stuff I wrote about Disney in that book got me kicked out of the Disney stores.
Oh.
Which is like the least of my worries. I had a meeting.
Because you had work in the Disney stores, or?
Well, they had my books in the Disney stores, and then they found out that there were cryptic underground jabs at Disney in the stuff they were selling, which apparently has happened more than they would ever want to admit. A lot of artists have found that quite easy to do. They're just such an obnoxious bunch if you meet them.
That is funny. Yeah. So, so some early books were done with Conley and I think Gail Ross, and then you started working with
and then you
Debbie.
can take this part out if you want to, but Gail Ross just wanted to squabble with people all the time, and she liked to argue with people on the internet, and she just liked to make enemies, and she would pick on my friends if they came to a conference here and stuff, and then she went absolutely ballistic at the end there, backing Chad Smith, and did some really racist commercials they couldn't even show on TV, you know. They're going after the freedmen. We're going to get the freedmen, you know. They just buried themselves. Of course, they buried themselves with a white guy, Bill John Baker's 132nd Cherokee. He's not exactly an Indian. He's like the whitest chief of any tribe ever in the history of tribes, probably, going back to the time when the government appointed Cherokee chiefs for a day that were about as white as him. You know, but the people themselves elected him to get Smith out of there, which it was like, you know, it's all, you know, people need to take a much closer look at Cherokee politics. It is a tempest in a teapot, but it's amusing as hell to see these people take themselves so seriously about a little dabble of government benefits, which is really just the government giving them back what they took from them. I mean, but then the casinos, you know, the casinos here in the Cherokee Nation, they have a Cherokee Entertainment, and they're a bunch of board members, and they hold court up there in Catisa where the big casino is. There's a little 50s golf course up behind it, and up on the second floor there's a meeting room with a table the size of New Jersey and tinted windows so nobody can see in, and they kind of run things like a bunch of mafiosos from up there, and they take all the Cherokee casino money and really generally spread it out amongst themselves. Like 14 people get 90% of that money, and the other 300,000 so-called Indians get 10% of the money. You know, it's crazy. They do it. Look it up. You know, go up there and look. If they'll let you, they won't let you in. You know, they certainly won't let me in. I've written about them actually in public. But, you know, they wouldn't publish that in the Tulsa World because Tulsa World is so far up there behind, so they're not going to say anything bad about the Cherokee Nation. It's crazy. What a planet. You know, that's another reason I like Tulsa, you know, just what a planet.
When did you and Debbie start to collaborate on books?
Well, really, it was when Gail Ross just became totally unpredictable and indecisive, and things were unmanageable, and she was coming up with just lavishly inappropriate schemes for books that had no interest to me at all. And one day I asked Debbie, do you think you could, and she started writing me some books, and they were flawless, and they went with she'd worked under like 4 different directors at the Cherokee Heritage Center, and she wrote all of them's letters. You know, they can deny it if they want to, but everybody knows it's true. It was her that wrote their letters. And so, you know, when she started writing, she never used bad grammar. She won't cuss. I tried to get her to cuss once in a while, just to tease her, and she won't cuss, you know. But she's, you know, like this wild guitar player, free spirit. She's like an angel, you know. I mean, you can't get an angel to cuss, even if you try.
Well, were there any challenges?
She was the perfect collaborator. No, in fact, au contrary, we could be doing a lot more children's books if we wanted to, but you know, you just want to do other stuff. You know, I've worked on 100 book and video projects, and none of them were like bestseller huge. Some of them were pretty well received though, and
won some awards.
Won some awards, but you know, I just assumed they went to somebody else. I don't need them. I never needed them, you know. I suppose they've probably taken. I've won the Trail of Tears art show out there that the Cherokees have. Yeah, but
you mean Grand Award?
No, I've won. Yeah, Grand Prize,
Grand Award,
Grand Prix. I've won it, but I'm sure they've taken my name off of their programs by now because I don't have the little magic card that even if you're 1/4000th, that's what makes you an Indian, you know. It's all fun to me. It's all fun and games, you know.
So do you kind of feel like illustrating might sometimes take away time that you would rather spend doing paintings, whatever?
Oh, we're working on a new book right now. I'm never not working on the book illustrations. In fact, the painting I'm working on right now was a drawing I did for a book 7 years ago that I always wanted to turn it into when I worked on those black and white drawings for those books, I spent so long on those. They were so thought out. They're going to be around for a long time, whether I like it or not. And all my flaws and all their virtues are going to be visible for a long time to come.
And that was for the grandmother tales, right?
Yeah, and then the grandmother tales verged into these kind of Cherokee Wander Stories that were in color and were mostly original stories that Debbie came up with that were along the lines of the ancient stories. And Robert Conley took one look at a couple of them and said, this is what shows that the culture is still alive, that you're doing new stories that still portray the ancient culture. And I said, did I do that? You know. But yeah, I've gotten some great kudos from people. I've gotten some criticism from people. But the main thing is, I've got this little guy inside of me that wants to paint every day and gets up and says, what are you going to do today? What are you going to paint? You know, not how quick can we get rid of this mundane, you got to go to the bank and cash a check, you've got to go pay the car insurance, you've got to do that stuff, and then you got to go paint, you know.
Well, I was going to ask.
Any day I'm not painting, I consider a day of my life that is wasted. Though I know a lot of artists have drifted off into other callings. I'm not so sure most of them were serious to begin with, and they hit onto a little theme and they just beat it into the ground, you know. And I get so many ideas for paintings I don't think I could ever. I'd like to do some documentary film stuff. I'd like you to help me with it if you want to. But you know, the story of Spiral Mound, what happened over there was one of the most atrocious stories in the history. What happened first was one of the most spectacular stories of mankind when they were doing all those shell carvings, and it was this sacred burial place, and the people met there for their black drink ceremonies and did engravings of the sky designs that they saw. And then these Arkansas guys get a mining lease on the place and go in and just dig the stuff out of there and throw the bones in the corner and take all the shell work. And outside the museum, I mean outside the mound is Gilcrease, you know, OU, Peabody Museum at Harvard, Field Museum at Chicago. They've all got their reps out there bidding on the baskets of goodies coming out of the mound. And, you know, the one that pays the most gets the goodies. Mm-hmm. And it's so amazing. One of the things, the Leitner, they call it the Leitner fragments, ended up at the Peabody Museum, OU Museum, and the Gilcrease Museum. Pieces of it came out in 3 different baskets that were purchased by 3 different museums. And then private collectors were there bidding for stuff that we've still never seen. It wasn't bad enough that they just raped the mound. We don't even get to see the stuff they took out of there and assess its importance on a scale of 1 to 10. It's a goddamn 50, you know. I mean, it has more shell work than all the other American mounds put together. And the shells were brought all the way up from the coast of Florida by these proto-Mayan people. That's who the Creeks are. You know, the Creek language and the Mayan language were one language 2,000 years ago. And so it's kind of sad, you know, but you know, it's good, I think, for people to get mad about what happened and see the thing. As you can see, I really want to do this. I don't know if I want to do it as a documentary, though, or do it like as a Tarantino film, you know, because it really has a lot of weird drama involved, especially when you go back to the people that built the place in the first place. And when the Spaniards came through with 600 pigs, Coronado, and spread 50 diseases to all the people living here, and where we're sitting now became the ghost lands. That's why it was so easily inhabited here, because the people had all died off from the diseases spread by the Spanish conquerors, you know. Well, this land was for the taking, as they say.
You've kind of mentioned the fact that you don't really carry a lot of other artists' work.
Who do I admire?
Well, I was going to ask, I can see that one reason maybe for your gallery lasting so long is you can paint while you're here. That's an important factor. But
it's really a studio. It's never been a gallery. That's such a misnomer out there on the sign. I've had 100 people walk in and say, "Oh, I thought this was a business."
Well, I was going to ask, is that a distraction?
No, it's not. It's a studio.
Is that a distraction when people walk in?
No, I'm not distracted by people. I'm amused by people. I don't care. Sometimes I learn just what not to say, how not to act, what kind of perfume not to wear. You know, I mean, I'm quite interested in people as a species, though I don't think they have much of a future. I think they've already worn out their options.
You know, you talked a little bit about one project that you'd be excited to work on. Is there another one that you're currently working on that you're excited about?
Oh yeah, several, but some of them I just don't want to go into them because the people that I'm working on them with would get really upset if I talked about what we were up to. So mainly I've talked about the things that are my projects, you know. You
had a health scare, a bad health scare.
Well, I got the typical disease of living too long. I got an arrhythmia, you know, and my valves were good, my cholesterol was good, but my heart apparently has 2 different Congo players, one playing the top valves and another one playing the bottom valves and not playing the same tune at the same time at all. So with a series of proper meds, I'm just having normal experiences.
It hasn't impacted your art.
I don't see that it has, but others might discern differences that have slipped by me because I'm just me painting. You know,
Well, let's talk about your creative techniques and process in a little more detail. You work mainly in acrylic on canvas, is that right?
Yeah, I started out painting with oils, but I had an art teacher, Mrs. Billington, turned me on to the wonders of the new acrylic paints.
Was this the high school teacher?
Yeah, and she was right. They were fun to work with. And then later on, when I did some tests with oil paints and acrylics, I could see by setting a couple of paintings outside for a year that the acrylics were going to last a lot longer than the oils. The oils were already breaking down after a year of the elephants, but the acrylic paints, basically I was winning prizes with things that had sat out under a walnut tree for a year, you know. But it's good to test your materials, because I do want stuff to last as long as it can.
You've also done a number of black and white, pen and ink drawings.
Yeah, they are pen and ink drawings. I would just really encourage people not to use markers and crap like that, because they're not permanent. They don't last. But if you can get some good ink and real ink pens, you can do some drawings that'll last for centuries. I've got a pile of them back there.
Have you ever experimented with any three-dimensional media?
Oh, sure. You're sitting looking at it. I've done, but mostly little sculptures. And there was a guy that I really liked as a kid who was a painter named Thomas Hart Benton, who lived up at Kansas City and became known as the absolute leader of the regionalism that was going on at that point. Benton would make clay models of his figures and light them with a clamp-on light to see how the light was going to go, and then paint that. So he made little dioramas, lit them, and then painted the dioramas, and then put in the detail, you know. And I could see, watching him do that, the idea that you wanted to really how to give your paintings a three-dimensional quality, which I don't always do. You know, sometimes I like the linear quality you get emulating ink strokes with your paint, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I never know what I'm going to paint till I start on that painting.
Well, I was going to ask if sketching is important to you beforehand.
Well, yeah, like the painting I'm working on right now, I did it as an ink drawing 7 years ago.
How important are titles to your work?
Oh, just absolutely no importance at all. Just it's something that's been thrust on me by art buyers that think every painting ought to have a title. So I really do try to give them the oddest titles I can hang on them.
I know some of your imagery is drawn from traditional Cherokee stories, and then also these re-envisionings of stories as Debbie
Yeah, and I
writes
draw a
them.
lot of my imagery right out of the woods. I love to go study the woods. I'm more of an expressionist than an impressionist. I'll go out and look at the woods all day and then come back and paint some stuff, and it looks like what I was looking at, but it doesn't, so it's expressionism. But yeah, I'm more of an expressionist than an impressionist, you know.
Your signature is pretty straightforward. Was it, sometimes it takes artists a while to find out how they want to do that.
No, I wanted it to be so simple that anybody that looked at it that read any form of English at all could just pick it up and understand what it said. So I did that Greco-Roman alphabet from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago and tried to put it into it.
Which has such a nice graphic quality. What's your creative process?
What's that mean? I mean, I get up, I take a shower, I brush my teeth, I take care of whatever mundane business is staring me in the eye, and then I try to paint all day, you know. That's my plan. And then some people show up and I end up doing something besides painting, you know, just hanging out, talking about politics, talking about art. And basically the conversation we're having here today is the conversation I've had every day of my life. I get the same questions, I get the same answers, I have the same amount of fun doing it that I always did.
What do you want your artwork to, how do you want it to impact the viewer?
I want it to be on spaceships flying out through the galaxies in the distant future.
Looking back,
And they can look out through space and then look at that and compare the two and realize that I'm doing the same thing.
Looking back so far, what has been one of the pivotal moments of your art career?
Pivotal moments would include meeting Allen Ginsberg, meeting Michael McClure the poet, meeting Cecil Dick the artist, meeting just the hundreds of cool, I met Jerry Garcia back before they changed the name of their little band to the Grateful Dead. They were still the Warlocks, which I always thought was a stupid name for a band. And I love the Grateful Dead. That at least had some. I was there the day they changed it, as a matter of fact. But I enjoyed, that's the pivotal moments in my life were like meeting Jimi Hendrix, meeting,
What was it like meeting Jimi Hendrix?
Well, it was like everybody was wanting to meet Hendrix, and it was like we just pointed at each other and knew we were heading in the same direction, and that we didn't need to overamp each other, and he had things when Jimi Hendrix recorded Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtowers was the exact moment that world music was integrated as we see it now. Like, I don't know if Eric Clapton would have done Bob Marley songs if it hadn't been for Jimi Hendrix doing that Bob Dylan. It was when things came together in the world, It was a black and white moment. It was, so though I don't see either of them as actually black or actually white at all, I see them as people who integrate, who pull things together, I'm sure that the Army intelligence people and the CIA killed Hendrix because his message was just way too much more than they could bear. Dylan was well ensconced and protected. He would never stay at a hotel. He would stay with his friends. He'd move around, What happened to Marley, he went up to New York to sign some record contracts. This is according to Marley. And he was going to be there one night, sign some contracts, and fly back. In the middle of the night, he woke up because he was being held down by two white guys with crew cuts wearing suits. And a third guy came across the hotel room and tore open a manila bag that had a plastic envelope inside of it, and then slapped him several times as hard as he could. And as Marley gasped and took an inhale breath, he threw this, in a choreographed motion, he threw the powder in the envelope right into his face. And the three of them walked over to the sink in the room, washed their hands, and left. And that was Marley's description of what happened. A year and a half later, this vegetarian, this Rastafarian, suddenly had cancers forming all over his body. But when he came back to Trenchtown the next day, he said, "I believe I've been assassinated," because I had friends that were sitting there with him when he said it, And he thought that it was because he'd done the Freedom Concert for Zimbabwe, and he thought that they were a combo of American CIA and South African secret police. That was his take on who they were, though nobody will ever really know until we really do develop time machines,
Well, we're going to look at your paintings here in a minute. Is there a low point in your career so far?
No, I don't think so. I've had lots of high points, though.
All right.
I'm not much for downers, I don't drink much. I don't take downer drugs. I don't hang out with people that consistently drag me into where I don't want to go. I just kind of avoid them. And when my parents died, I was married 30 years ago, and she died. These were, the only low points were when people that I loved, that I was really close to, were pulled away from me. And there's no getting over that. That's permanent. Everybody has it. A lot of people let it tear them down. I don't know. I guess it's torn me down to a degree, but Yeah, I miss my parents. Miss them every day.
Well, we're going to look at some of your work here. So you want to tell me about this painting?
Well, I think you can just I think it'd be better if I was quiet for a minute and you just focused in on certain areas of it.
Well, I love the three different worlds in a way, the three different world views.
The designs at the top are all from Sparrow Mound here in Oklahoma. Those are Sparrow designs. And
the clouds in the middle, clouds in the sky.
It was kind of an homage to widescreen TVs. You know, you flip channels from one to another, and you know, why would somebody want one of my paintings on the wall when they could have a widescreen TV that shows 1 billion images? You know, it's kind of a question more than an answer.
Well, it's a wonderful piece. I really like it.
Yeah, I enjoyed painting it. It took weeks and weeks.
Okay, you want to talk to us about this painting?
Yeah, this painting. I've done a few paintings of the Cherokee Little People. Now, this lady represents the Queen of the Little People, and you can kind of tell that by her regal demeanor. But I think all of the Cherokee Little People women have that regal demeanor, and I think that the Queen might be an interchangeable position. Now, the Queen of the Ants that she's talking to is obviously the Queen of the Ants because she's got the wings in case she needs to make a fast getaway. Because sometimes queens have to beat it because their colony's being destroyed. And it's part of their survival technique.
And you signed it twice, it looks like.
I did. And I didn't realize that till I had it framed. I'll probably remove one of those, but most people don't notice that it's signed at all, let alone that it's signed in opposite corners.
It's got some wonderful colors, and I love the imagery.
I'm glad you caught that, huh?
All right, and how about this painting?
Well, it's one of my typical paintings, and it's got a rabbit and beaver in a canoe, and I put it up on Facebook, and the inimitable and famous Creek poet Joy Harjo saw it and said, I want that. And she's going to pick it up on the 5th of October, which is just a couple of days.
Wonderful.
But she already sent me a check for it.
And
so
she does nice canoeing.
Yeah, and it's real nice when you're an artist and you sell artwork to poets that you admire. That's just, I'd rather give it to her than sell it to most people I've met, you know? So it thrilled me.
Another piece.
Yeah, and the painting you're looking at is 2 feet by 2 foot. And but when you paint them that way, they're 3 feet across and 3 feet high. That's why I like doing the paintings as diamonds. But what you're looking at there is one of my more or less typical animal dances that incorporate most, if not all, of the pantheon of Cherokee animal characters that from Rabbit, who's the trickster messenger, to, you know, all the animals have a big place in the Cherokee stories. They're a lot more important than people. And they always saw them as people, though. It was about the bear people and the bird people and the, you know, the animal people were considered as much people, if not more people, than the people. You know, they were like they would be the bear people, the Yona, Yunwei, the people that are bears. You know. Anyway, I think that's going to be the cover of a Sale magazine, which is Society of American Indian Literature. And I was kind of glad that it wasn't the Journal of American Indian Literature, which would be the Jail magazine, you know. But, yeah, the girl who's the editor of the magazine is scraping up the money to buy the painting from me, which I thought was pretty nice of her to do that, you know.
That's wonderful.
I want to see it hanging on her wall as much as she does. It's real important to me where the paintings end up. Probably close to 100 of my paintings have ended up in museums. Collectors have bought my paintings, donated them to museum collections. I couldn't afford to give all those paintings to museums. I've used the money to feed my family and help my friends for the last 30 years. I don't have any extra cash to give away paintings, but they're going to some pretty good people out there. So good museums.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Murv.
Hopefully some of the people, before we wrap this up, that have my paintings would consider giving them to museums, so they will not just end up in some creepy little private collection.